The house was quiet, but not peaceful. Morning light slipped through tall windows, touching polished floors and expensive furniture that carried no warmth. Welcome to my channel. If you're watching this on Facebook, don't forget to follow the page. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to subscribe to the channel. If you enjoyed the story, let me know in the comments below. You can also share your thoughts from the heart in the comments, so I can create more stories based on what you love. Thank you for your support. Every object in the room had value, yet nothing felt alive. The silence did not come from calm, it came from control. Margaret Hale stood near the window, holding a porcelain cup she had owned for years. Her grip was steady, but her thoughts were not. Outside, the city of Los Angeles was already awake, moving fast, chasing dreams, building fortunes. Inside this house, only one rule existed. Nothing moved without her approval. Behind her, soft footsteps stopped. Mom. Margaret did not turn around. Her daughter, Claire Hale, waited. She had learned long ago that speaking too quickly only made things worse. At 29, Claire was confident in boardrooms, fearless in negotiations, and respected by people twice her age. Yet in front of her mother, she still felt like a child asking permission to breathe. I reviewed the portfolio last night, Claire said carefully. There are areas where we're losing momentum. Margaret finally turned. Her expression was calm, unreadable, perfected over decades of leadership. We are not losing anything, she replied. We are choosing stability. Claire nodded, though her chest tightened. Stability can become stagnation. That word landed heavily. Margaret placed the cup down with precise control. You use words you don't fully understand. Claire met her gaze. I understand numbers. And they're speaking clearly. Margaret stepped closer, her presence filling the room. Numbers obey discipline. People make mistakes. Claire swallowed. I'm not people. I'm your daughter. Margaret's eyes hardened, not with anger, but with something colder. That, she said, is exactly why you are dangerous. Claire felt the familiar ache rise in her chest. This was not new. Every conversation eventually led here, power disguised as protection, authority wrapped in concern. Margaret Hale was not just a mother. She was a legend. Founder of Hale Financial Group. Self-made. Ruthless in strategy, flawless in execution. She built her empire after Claire's father died suddenly, leaving behind debt, doubt, and a fragile child. Margaret never allowed weakness again. She raised Claire inside boardrooms, not playgrounds. Tutors replaced bedtime stories. Lessons replaced comfort. Claire learned early that love, in this house, was measured by performance. And Claire performed well. Top universities. Fast promotions. Sharp instincts. But still, it was never enough. Later that afternoon, Claire sat alone in her office downtown. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the city stretching endlessly, full of opportunity. On her desk lay a thin folder, an independent investment proposal she had been working on for months. It was smart, ethical, profitable, everything her mother avoided. Claire's phone buzzed. A message from Margaret's assistant. Mrs. Hale requests your presence at the house tonight. No explanation. No request. Only instruction. Claire leaned back, closing her eyes. She already knew what was coming. Dinner was formal, as always. The table was long, polished, and intimidating. Only 2 seats were occupied. Margaret spoke first. I've been informed you've been exploring external ventures. Claire did not flinch. I have. Without my consent. I don't need consent to think. Margaret lifted her glass slowly. You do when your name is tied to mine. Claire felt heat rise in her face. That's the problem. You don't see me as separate. Margaret set the glass down. Separation is earned. Claire stood up. I have earned it. I've proven myself again and again. Margaret's voice remained calm. You've followed instructions. That's not the same thing, Claire said, her voice shaking slightly. You don't trust me to lead because you're afraid of losing control. Silence filled the room. Then Margaret spoke. Words that would change everything. You will not inherit this company while I am alive. Claire froze. Margaret continued, and if you choose to challenge my authority, you may not inherit it at all. The air felt heavy. "You're threatening me," Claire whispered. "I'm protecting what I built," Margaret replied. "From risk. From arrogance. From you, if necessary." Claire felt something break, not loudly, but completely. She nodded slowly. "Then we are no longer family in business." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "You won't survive without me." Claire met her gaze, tears held back by sheer will. "Watch me." She walked out without looking back. That night, the city lights looked different. Claire sat in her car, hands resting on the steering wheel, heart pounding. For the first time, fear and freedom existed together. She made a decision. She would build something of her own. And she would never ask permission again. What she didn't know was this. Margaret had already begun planning her response. Because for Margaret Hale, losing control was not an option. And she was willing to sacrifice her daughter to keep it. The first thing Claire learned after leaving her mother's house was this. Freedom is expensive. Not just financially, but emotionally. She rented a modest office far from Hale Financial Group's shining towers. No name recognition. No inherited trust. Just her reputation, her intelligence, and a quiet fire burning inside her. People were polite when they heard her last name. Then they hesitated. Some meetings ended early. Some calls were never returned. Doors that once opened automatically now stayed closed. Margaret Hale's shadow was long. Claire understood the message clearly. Her mother had not chased her. She had surrounded her. Across the city, Margaret sat in her private study, reviewing reports with sharp focus. Screens glowed softly in the dim light. Names, figures, movements, everything under control. "Claire Hale has registered a new firm," her advisor said carefully. "Small scale. Private funding." Margaret's lips curved slightly. Not a smile. Something colder. "She won't last," Margaret replied. "Talent without structure collapses." "Should we intervene?" Margaret paused. "No. Let her struggle. Struggle teaches obedience." But even as she said it, something unsettled her. Claire was not weak. She had Margaret's mind. And that was dangerous. Weeks passed. Claire worked harder than she ever had before. She listened more. Calculated more carefully. She built trust slowly, honestly. Her firm grew, not loudly, but steadily. Clients stayed. Partners respected her. And something unexpected happened. She enjoyed it. No approvals. No silent judgment. No pressure to perform for love. Just work. Just results. One evening, as she prepared to leave the office, her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. "Claire," a familiar voice said. "It's your mother." Claire closed her eyes briefly. "What do you want?" Margaret did not respond immediately. When she did, her tone was measured. "I've reviewed your recent moves." "Of course you have," Claire replied. "You're overextending." "I'm adapting." "You're exposing yourself." "I'm learning." Margaret exhaled slowly. "You are making this harder than it needs to be." Claire leaned against her desk. "No, Mom. You are." Silence. Then Margaret spoke words that carried weight. "Come back. We'll restructure. Together." Claire almost laughed. "On your terms." "On proven terms," Margaret corrected. Claire's voice was calm, but firm. "I'm not coming back." Margaret's tone hardened. "Then you leave me no choice." The line went dead. The next morning, headlines began to circulate. Questions about Claire's firm. Quiet rumors. Doubts planted carefully, professionally. Nothing illegal. Nothing obvious. But effective. Potential partners hesitated. Investors asked questions that had never mattered before. Claire sat in her office, reading the articles slowly, understanding exactly what was happening. Her mother was not attacking her directly. She was erasing her. Claire felt anger rise, but she forced it down. Emotion was Margaret's weapon. Claire would not use it. That night, Claire met with Daniel Ross, a senior analyst who had quietly left Hale Financial Group months earlier. "She's tightening the field," Daniel said. "Not to destroy you. To exhaust you." Claire nodded. "She wants me to crawl back. Will you?" Claire's answer came without hesitation. "No." Daniel studied her. "Then you need leverage." Claire looked at him sharply. What kind? The kind she can't control. Meanwhile, Margaret felt something unfamiliar creeping into her thoughts. Uncertainty. Claire had not returned, had not begged, had not failed. Instead, she had adapted. Margaret reviewed her daughter's trajectory again and again, searching for weakness. She found none. That frightened her, because Margaret understood one truth better than anyone. When control fails, exposure follows. And Margaret Hale had secrets. A charity gala brought them together again. Public space. Bright lights. Smiling faces. Margaret arrived composed, powerful, admired. Claire arrived calm, independent, unafraid. They locked eyes across the room. For a moment, the world disappeared. "You look well," Margaret said when they stood face to face. "So do you," Claire replied. Margaret leaned closer. "This ends when I say it ends." Claire smiled politely. "That's where you're wrong." Margaret's expression barely shifted. "Careful." "I am," Claire said. "That's why I'm no longer under you." Margaret straightened. "You are nothing without this family." Claire's voice was quiet, but it carried. "I am everything you taught me to be. You just didn't expect me to use it against you." Margaret's eyes darkened. The war was no longer private. In the days that followed, lines were drawn. Executives chose sides. Old allies reconsidered loyalties. The media sensed tension, though they didn't yet understand its depth. Claire uncovered something during a routine review, an old financial maneuver from years ago. Perfectly legal on paper. Morally questionable. Hidden under layers of authority. Margaret had buried a decision that saved her company once, but destroyed another family. Claire stared at the documents for a long time. This was not revenge. This was truth. And truth had power. Margaret felt it before she saw it. A shift. Calls returned slower. Conversations felt guarded. She confronted her advisor. "What's happening?" "They're nervous," he admitted. "Claire has been asking questions." Margaret's jaw tightened. "About what?" "About the early years." Margaret stood slowly. "Stop her." "We can't," he said carefully. "Not without drawing attention." Margaret's hands clenched. For the first time in decades, control was slipping. And it was her daughter holding the edge. Claire did not feel victorious. She felt heavy. She had never wanted to fight her mother. But she would not lose herself to save her. She prepared her next move carefully, not to destroy, but to confront. To force truth into the open. Because this was no longer about money. It was about identity. And only one of them could define the future. The city did not know it yet, but something irreversible had already begun. Claire sat alone in her office long after sunset. The lights of neighboring buildings flickered like distant stars. On her desk lay a neatly organized file, years of buried decisions, silent approvals, and consequences no one had questioned at the time. She was not searching for revenge. She was searching for balance. But balance is dangerous when power has lived without challenge for too long. Margaret Hale woke before dawn, as she always had. Discipline had shaped her life, sharpened her instincts, and carried her through storms others never survived. Yet that morning, something felt different. The silence felt heavier. She dressed with precision, reviewed the day's agenda, and stepped into her car. The driver asked if she wanted music. "No," Margaret replied. She needed to think. Claire's questions had reached deeper than expected. Not accusations, investigations. That made them harder to silence. Margaret understood something most people didn't. Truth does not destroy power. Timing does. At Hale Financial Group, meetings felt slower. Eyes lingered longer. Words were chosen more carefully. Margaret noticed everything. When her senior strategist finally spoke, his voice carried unease. "We've received inquiries about the Marlowe project." Margaret's face remained calm. "That matter was resolved years ago." "Yes," he said. "But it's resurfacing." "By whom?" He hesitated. "Your daughter." The room felt suddenly smaller. Margaret leaned back. "She has no authority." "No," he agreed. "But she has access." Margaret closed her eyes briefly. Access was something she had given Claire herself, years ago, believing trust could be shaped like loyalty. She was wrong. Claire met with an investigative journalist later that week. Not to expose. Not yet. Only to understand. What happens if this goes public? Claire asked. The journalist studied the files. It would rewrite your mother's legacy. Claire swallowed. And the people affected? They'd finally be heard. Claire nodded slowly. She did not leave the meeting feeling powerful. She left feeling responsible. That evening, Margaret called Claire again. This time, her voice lacked its usual sharp edge. You've crossed a line, Margaret said. Claire responded calmly. I'm standing on it. You think this makes you strong. I think it makes me honest. Margaret's breath tightened. Honesty is a luxury leaders can't afford. Claire's voice softened. Then maybe leadership is the problem. Silence stretched. Margaret spoke quietly. I did what I had to do. And I'm doing what I have to do, Claire replied. Margaret ended the call. For the first time in years, she felt fear not of loss, but of exposure. Pressure mounted. Whispers turned into questions. Questions turned into concern. Margaret realized something too late. Claire was not attacking her. She was waiting. Waiting for Margaret to confront the truth herself. But Margaret had built her life avoiding that moment. The board demanded clarity. Margaret stood before them, composed, controlled. We are experiencing temporary distractions, she said. Nothing more. One board member spoke carefully. Distractions tied to ethics are rarely temporary. Margaret's eyes sharpened. This company exists because of my decisions. And it may fall because of them, another replied. Margaret felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Power was slipping, not violently, but quietly. Just as she once took it. Claire watched events unfold from a distance. She did not celebrate. She remembered the woman who raised her. The sacrifices. The nights without comfort. The strength that built everything. And the fear that destroyed connection. Claire realized something painful. Her mother did not fight for money. She fought because she had nothing else. They met again, this time without witnesses. Margaret's home felt emptier than before. You were supposed to be my continuation, Margaret said softly. I wanted to be your equal, Claire replied. Margaret's voice cracked. Equality is chaos. No, Claire said gently. Fear is. Margaret turned away. Years of control collapsed into one fragile moment. I don't know how to stop, Margaret whispered. Claire felt tears rise, but she did not look away. Then let go, she said. Margaret shook her head. If I let go, everything I am disappears. Claire stepped closer. No, everything you built remains. But you don't have to be alone anymore. Margaret laughed bitterly. You think this is about us? It always was, Claire replied. The final decision loomed. Expose everything and destroy the empire. Or protect the empire and destroy themselves. Claire did not sleep that night. She understood now winning was not the goal. Ending the cycle was. Morning arrived quietly. Margaret stood at her window again, watching the city breathe. Claire arrived without announcement. They stood together, side by side, without touching. One move ends this, Margaret said. Yes, Claire replied. And we won't both like it. No, Claire said softly. But we'll both survive it. Margaret closed her eyes. For the first time in her life, she chose uncertainty. The world would soon hear the truth. But not as a weapon. As a reckoning. And when it did, nothing would ever return to the way it was. Morning did not arrive with answers. It arrived with weight. The city woke slowly, unaware that a quiet storm was about to break. Traffic moved. Phones buzzed. Offices opened. Life continued because it always does right before something changes forever. Margaret Hale stood in her study, dressed in dark gray, the color she wore when decisions carried consequences. The room around her reflected decades of control, awards, documents, framed headlines celebrating her rise. She touched none of them. Across the city, Claire sat at her desk, hands folded, breathing steadily. The file was open in front of her. Not as evidence. As responsibility. They were no longer enemies chasing victory. They were two women standing at the edge of truth. The board meeting was scheduled for noon. Margaret arrived early. She always did. The room filled slowly with executives, legal advisors, and longtime allies. Their expressions were respectful but guarded. Claire entered last. Not as an outsider. Not as an heir. As an equal. The room fell quiet. Margaret did not look at her daughter immediately. She stared at the city skyline beyond the glass walls, remembering how it once looked when she had nothing. Then she turned. "Let's begin," she said. The presentation started. Clear. Calm. Factual. No accusations. No drama. Just truth. The Marlowe Project. The decision made under pressure. The lives affected quietly. The success that followed. Every slide removed another layer of silence. Margaret listened without interruption. When it ended, the room waited. She stood slowly. "I approve this," Margaret said. "I take responsibility for it." A murmur moved through the room. She continued, "At the time, I believed survival justified the cost. I was wrong." Claire felt her breath catch. Margaret looked directly at the board. "We will establish restitution, transparency, and independent oversight." Someone asked quietly, "And leadership?" Margaret did not answer immediately. She turned to Claire. "For years," Margaret said, "I believed control was the same as protection. I believed strength meant standing alone." Her voice steadied. "I was wrong about that too." She stepped back. "I resign as CEO, effective immediately." The room went still. Margaret placed her hand flat on the table. "This company deserves a future not shaped by fear." She looked at Claire one last time. "So does my daughter." The news spread fast. Markets reacted. Media speculated. Opinions divided. Some praised the decision. Some questioned it. Some tried to rewrite the story. But the truth was already out. Margaret left the building quietly, without cameras, without statements. For the first time in her life, she did not lead the exit. Claire remained. Not triumphant. Not relieved. Just present. Weeks passed. Claire took interim leadership, not as a symbol, but as a stabilizer. She did not erase her mother's legacy. She reframed it. Ethical reforms. Open communication. Measured risk. The company breathed differently. So did Claire. Margaret moved into a smaller home near the coast. No staff. No schedule. No titles. At first, the quiet felt unbearable. Then it felt honest. One evening, Claire visited. They sat on the porch, watching the ocean stretch endlessly. "I didn't destroy you," Claire said softly. Margaret nodded. "You freed me." They sat in silence. Not broken. Not healed. But real. The world moved on, as it always does. But something fundamental had changed. Power was no longer inherited without question. Love was no longer measured by control. And two women, once locked in a war over wealth, had chosen something harder than winning. They chose truth. And that choice echoed far beyond money. Far beyond legacy. Into something lasting. Something human.